You're on mute.
Chris, I like your hair, bud. That's the new yoga look.
Thank you.
And I saw Chris.
It's all real too.
Beach about
I have no extensions like Brunson. This is all my own hair.
I'm sensing a little hair envy here, guys.
Buddy, I saw you riding bikes with your wife on the beach up in Carlsbad. I didn't even recognize you with that hair. You're getting aggressive. Love it.
Yeah, with a mask on, nobody knows who I am. It's great.
Hey man, you appeal to the younger set, dude. That's a suave. You dropped the triangle kerchief pocket, but you donned the hair.
Yep. Yep. And when I pull it back and put it in a tail, it's crazy.
You're Gordon Gecko.
I got some good separated at birth, so I'll tell you that. It's funny.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started here. Ron, if you're able to join via video, that'd be great.
I don't know why my computer is not doing it, but I'll keep messing around while you're talking.
Okay, sounds great. All right, well, welcome everyone to the our Lunch and Learn for this month. This is called A View from the Top. We've got a great set of panelists here with us today, representing kind of all aspects of the commercial real estate industry. We'll get some great perspectives as we work through this. So really happy to have everyone here. Thanks you all for coming and being a part of this. We also want to thank our sponsors who make this happen. All of our DL Diamond sponsors, which are showing on the screen as well. They're the ones that help make this possible for us to hold these events and for having a great program here in San Diego. So we'll go ahead and get started with the introductions. I'm gonna go around my screen, and Kelly, we'll start with you. Kelly, I think you're on mute.
No, I had a
start.
bad connection apparently here. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Everyone. Got to stand on one foot. Maybe it'll help. So thanks for inviting us in today. A great panel of esteemed partners here. So I'm a industrial real estate focused broker. I got in 1986. I'm very old. Anything I can do to impart some wisdom, if I can remember it, I'll be happy to do so. I work on primarily larger warehouse manufacturing locations across the United States, primarily the Western U.S. and of course, Southern California, and joined right out of college and never looked back. I used to do a lot of landlord representation back in the day, and then switched over to the tenant side about 15 years ago.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. Chris?
Yes, thank you. My name is Chris Pascal, 35-year CBRE veteran, primarily focused on institutional landlord representation. I also do some work with local well-capitalized groups, sell land when it's selling, done a lot of business park work, like doing ground-up development, design, help guys figure out what to build that will lease. Went to USD, graduated quite a while ago. Married, 4 kids, 3 grandkids, like live music and anything ocean related.
Cannot wait to get back to the live music here shortly. Hopefully we'll be all enjoying some concerts this summer. So thank you, Chris. Yeah. Derek, pass it over to you.
All right, Derek Hulse. I'm a managing director with Cushman & Wakefield. I also specialize in landlord representation, institutional quality, Class A mainly, some ground up development. I've been in the business for, 16 years now. No grandkids, and Chris, you're looking good for a grandfather, my friend. So keep it up. It's got to be the hair, as we were talking about prior to this call. Hair keeps you young, but 2 daughters, 1 going into high school amazingly. And I don't know what else. I'm a Sagittarius. There you go.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate that. Preston, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Brunson Howard, an investment sales guy, primarily office, a little bit of industrial across the Southwest. I'm part of a larger team that's based out of LA. So we're fortunate to get to see a little bit broader swath of, of deal flows and capital flows and so forth. 2 kids. My wife left town yesterday. Hair was a little darker yesterday than it is today. I'll probably be bald by the end of the week, but happy to be here with you guys, and it's a great panel. Looking forward to it.
Perfect. Thank you, Brunson. Chad?
Yeah, Chad Uri. I work at JLL. Been at this about 22 years, and I head up our life science practice here in San Diego, and I'm one of the leaders nationally. And we do both tenant and landlord work, and I used to do a lot more tech work, but that's been slow. But so majority of our work now is all life science.
It sounds great. Well, excited to hear from you today, Chad. And obviously life science has been a bright sector over the past year. So looking forward to it. Ron?
Yeah, Ron Pepper here at Retail Insight. I started, I may be the oldest one here. I started at CB in '84, left there, started my company Retail Insight with Don Mosier in March of it. So we just had our 25th anniversary. We've got, we handle about 18 million square feet of retail space, and we're up about 250 tenants. We have about 10, 12 brokers here, and we're pretty much everything but LA and Southern California. Do tenant and landlord work and development as well.
That's great. Thank you, Ron. Well, again, thanks to all of you for being here. We really appreciate you giving us some time to chat about your perspective on the market. So why don't we go ahead and dive right in? This past year has obviously been a unique one for a variety of different reasons. We've had a pandemic, we've had a lot of other crises going on, and we've had a stock market that's been on a tear as well. So a lot of things have happened over the past year, but today we'll focus on some macroeconomic kind of questions and thoughts from all of you. Then we'll focus on some more stuff here in San Diego and see if we can't tease a little bit of a personal advice out from some of you as well for our young professionals in the industry. So a lot of experts have compared this past year to the recession in the early 90s, the aftermath of 9/11, and then the 2008 financial crisis as well. Chris, how have you approached this with those in mind after a long career for this pandemic? It's obviously been started by something that wasn't financially based, but has caused a lot of financial harm and in some ways some financial good as well.
It's been interesting for sure. My business has always been kind of focused on the personal touch, and I've tried to keep that up during a weird year. It's been successful. I'm fortunate to work on some really good projects. So while the leasing market has been a little bit rough for me, and my clients, I've got other projects I'm working on that have been very successful, and have kind of been in the right place at the right time. So maybe that happens after 35 years, very fortunate to be working on what I'm working on, and just trying to keep it all together.
Thank you, Chris. Derek, office has obviously been hit hard during this past year. How have you approached your job as of late, and how has it compared to some of those earlier crises that what we mentioned?
So just to define that a little bit, the 90s recession and the 2008 recession were very different than the aftermath of 9/11 and the current pandemic. I mean, the 90s recession was the result of restrictive monetary policy enacted by the federal government. The 2008 recession, as we know, was a result of financial deregulation and collapse of credit markets. The current pandemic and really what was happening in 9/11 were more likened to like a natural disaster of human capital, where there was an occurrence of a significant event and then had immediate economic impact. Obviously, this last year was unprecedented, and we haven't had the experience of a pandemic before. But I felt like, especially with my clients, and Chris touched on this a little bit too, is I feel like they needed to hear from me even more than they did before. And I'm really good about communicating with my clients on a regular basis. And I really doubled down on that during the pandemic, because I feel like we all felt a little isolated, like we're a little bit on an island, whether we're at home or by ourselves or with our families. We all had our unique situations. And so I really over communicated, kept them informed on what other landlords were doing, what little tenant activity there was in the market. I talked a lot about life science because you can't be all doom and gloom. You've got to go into these calls with some positive news. And I worked on strategy, not current strategy as much as what is the strategy coming out of this. And I was really proactive with that communication, and it seemed to do, you know, quite well. In fact, I picked, which is unusual, I picked up on some business during this past year of just being really trying to be as forward thinking as possible and proactive instead of reactive. I think that's always a key to our business.
That's great. Thanks for that, Derek. And we'll actually circle back to some of that in the further question here. Brunson, as regards the capital markets, again, a very unique year where we've had a lot of downward pressure in the economy, but then we've seen capital markets respond fairly favorably to what's been going on. Interest rates are continuing to stay historically low, though they've risen here lately. There seems to be a lot of cash on the sidelines getting ready to invest. How has this past pandemic related to some of those recessions as it relates to the capital markets?
Yeah, I think in some aspects, Derek, he hit the nail on the head in that this is, my perspective is it's a little bit of a global experiment that we're all kind of going through together versus, you know, a series of financial events that caused an outcome, or 9/11 that caused an outcome that trickled through every aspect of the economy. So from my seat, I think I know a couple of things for sure. One, we don't really know where this is heading yet because it's a completely unique circumstance. And when you look at the market, like all of us on this call do, whether you're on the panel or you're listening in, we're all kind of looking for data points to connect, to sort of figure out, you know, if you're in brokerage, if you're in office brokerage, or you're a tenant rep guy or gal, you're trying to figure out where the opportunity is. And obviously with respect to brokerage, there aren't as many guide rails. You can kind of seek out the sectors that have liquidity. And if you're set up for them, you know, you can go in and you can execute deals. But I think when we look at this thing through the lens of how capital sees it, how the capital markets see it, from my seat, it's really sector dependent. You know, if you're talking about hospitality or certain sectors of retail, it's a really challenged environment. If we ask Chad, has it been a challenging year? Has 2020 been a challenging year relative to 19 or 18? I mean, they're all challenging, but I wonder what his answer is. I won't answer for him, but from a life science perspective, you know, the broad headline is it's really been charging, and it was charging before COVID. It'll charge through COVID and beyond. If it's the office sector, that's a sort of a tale of a couple of different cities. If it's stable office and we're talking about selling it and financing it, there's plenty of liquidity for that on the debt and the equity side. If it's value added office, we could all get on the phone and call a bunch of investors that say, hey, we're ready to play ball. We'll buy value add office tomorrow. And they will, but they're going to savage you on the underwriting side of things. So you're not seeing any value added office come to the market. And really, you haven't seen a lot of stabilized office, at least in San Diego, come out. But there is liquidity for that. I know we're going to talk about debt capital, but I mean, to sort of answer your question, from a personal business standpoint, you have to go to where the opportunity is. And sometimes there isn't a lot of opportunity to go to. And in the absence of that, I think you do what Derek and Chris pointed out. You service your clients through thick and thin, whether you're servicing them through the context of a deal or whether you're servicing them through the context of information flow. I know the wrong thing, if there is a wrong thing to do, is to sort of, you know, turtle up and go into a shell and not communicate, not just with owners, but with your fellow brokers, because all of us are trying to figure this thing out at the family level, at the business level, and you can't do that, you know, in a vacuum on your own at your office, you know, without reaching out and talking to people. So we can't move the market on our own. I mean, Chris Pascal probably can, but the rest of us can't move the market on our own. So we have to react to the environment that we're in. And as Derek said, you want to be strategic and you want to be proactive when you can. But in my humble opinion, some part of what we do, at least in the brokerage side of the business, is reactive. It has to be, because we're wrapping ourselves around the needs of our clients, and we can't always predict what those are going to be. But I think communication, as Derek said, is the key to it, and exchanging ideas with not just the guys and gals that have the same jersey as you, but brokers at other shops.
And I think that's how we kind of navigate through this thing and find our way out of it.
No, I agree. I think it's one of the things we're probably all looking forward to is getting back to NAIOP events where we can see each other in person and have some of those exchanging of ideas. So that's great. Thank you, Brunson. There's been a lot of talk lately about the death of office, the death of retail, work from home forever, work from home in a hybrid perspective. A lot of companies are approaching it differently. Silicon Valley is kind of leading the way with, seems like, remote work forever now. But it does, I think, speak to the fact that tenants might be shifting how they use space and which businesses will do well in certain aspects of real estate, whether it be retail or office, industrial, life science. All those are kind of coming into focus on how people will be using space again. Kelly, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you're focused on the industrial side of it. Industrial's had a bright spot as of late, but industrials also, there's a lot of components to industrial. There'd be e-commerce, manufacturing. There's a big push for manufacturing to come back into America. How have you seen tenants shape their use of space over the past year, and what are you seeing going forwards?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So, I think everybody realizes that we went into 2020 with a huge head of steam, and there was a big disconnect between bid and ask. The shoe was on the other foot, and the landlords were just having a heyday. And so we tend to focus on industrial and distribution, owner users, buyers, as well as tenants. And this was a time when the big boys started to consolidate, had access to capital, growth models, ability to acquire assets at a cheaper price that they could put, either conventional debt on or SBA debt on and lock in a nice, occupancy cost for a long period of time and then potentially, ride, some appreciation that may or may not happen depending on what happens globally. But we, one of the big things I've been through Chris and I both, I was just counting, I got in 86, which is RTC, did the dot bomb in 99, did 9/11, the 2007, and now 2020. And there's one reoccurring theme on this that I think Chris really hit on the head on is that at least for me, customer service, I mean, Nordstrom's VIP customer service is really important. And then others I heard on this meeting talking about being the strategic planner on the team and volunteering and offering those services to, the office guys, it could be life science, industrial, et cetera, is super important because, nobody has a crystal ball on how this is going to happen, how it's going to play out. But the more we discuss, think, look at, projected revenues, products that they're bringing online, et cetera, if they can grab opportunities while it's low, and that goes for your investors too, and really kind of think through it, you've added the value that a lot of other people that are just, like you say, turtled up, not paying attention. And it's just, all it is persistence, motivation, and a good, team attitude. I think, you're going to survive.
That's great. Thank you, Kelly. Ron, I want to jump this question over to you. Retail's obviously been talked about a lot. It was talked about before the pandemic and has been harped on consistently since then. How are you seeing tenants adjust to this?
Well, despite the press and everything, retail is far from dead. Really what's happening is actually, it's interesting. A year ago, I sat down, Don, Mike, and I sat down and said, okay, what's going to happen? Do we need to start cutting back? I've never laid anybody off in 25 years. What's going to be, even the recession in 08, 09, we got hit, but we didn't know what was going to happen this last year. Well, it's actually been the opposite. What you read about in the press is companies not doing well, but in fact, most of the retailers have done pretty well, except for the big sit-down restaurants. They've really been hit pretty hard. But when you go and you look at what's happening with retail here, particularly in markets like San Diego or Orange County, where the barriers to entry are so difficult, there's basically no vacancy. Like CoStar, which is not one of my favorite companies, for retail, CoStar is pretty worthless. And they basically, all the stuff that they put in there, sorry, a little hot button there. But all of the things that they have for retail and leasing and comps are pretty worthless. And so when a space in our market here is usually leased 2 years before the leases come up. So when you look at the bigger picture, I did a report a few years ago on when there was some land still left here on how many retail projects would be in San Diego. And I came up with 23, and 18 of them were mixed use. So that's really what's going to happen. That's all the future. You know, everybody sees that. And, you know, it's interesting because retail used to be a stepchild, and brokerage was a stepchild, and in development, it's more of a stepchild. Now, and when you looked at mixed use projects in the past, they didn't take in, the retail was just a small piece of it. And they didn't put the parking very well. It didn't really work for it. Now you're seeing it all integrated, and they're getting more involved in all the aspects, whether it's retail, office, and residential, and even industrial. I never thought I'd see retail with industrial, but I think with the fulfillment centers you're seeing with Amazon and some of the stuff in the future, I wouldn't put any of that it all could come together like that. So I think here you're going to see everything going vertical as we've seen already, and that's just going to continue for the most part.
Thank you, Ron. Chad, as we move over to life sciences, it's been, I think, a unique year for the life science sector. San Diego's obviously had a very robust life sciences biotech scene for a long time, but in terms of the national spotlight, it is definitely shining on life sciences at the moment. How have you seen tenants use life science space, conversion to lab space? There's obviously been some aspects too of life science where the general public's coming to life science space for COVID testing, and it's probably been a shift away from being in the doctor's office. So what's your view on the shift in the usage of space?
Well, one, it never turned off, right? So when COVID hit, you got to remember, this is their world. The people that work in this space, they deal with this kind of stuff all the time, and they're working on things like this all the time. So, you know, the touring never really stopped. The activity never stopped. The hiring never stopped. What got interesting is, and it's not really the usage of space, right? So capital started flowing into these companies, and they had to hire, and they had to hire quickly. And everything's about speed to market, right? And so once they get capital, they need to hire, they need to advance R&D, they need to move things forward. And so the smaller companies, we never really saw them send people home. It was just 24/7. Now they went into stages, right? So they'd work in shifts, and sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. But the smaller companies where speed was really critical thing, the usage of space never changed. There's a little bit more spacing and things as you would imagine, but the larger companies, you know, that are in town, you know, they have to play by the rules a little bit more, right? You saw them act a little bit more like the Googles and the Microsofts of the world, where they gave them options, not the core critical lab operators, right? But, you know, sales, people in office space, a lot of those people went home and or got the option to work from home and the lab or the office. And where we're at now is really advising a lot of those clients. It's interesting, right? So hiring, everyone's raising money, everybody's hiring. The packages you can get as an employee at some of these companies are remarkable. It's extremely competitive. And so we sit in these meetings with these tenants all the time, and there's sometimes in the office space, there's nobody there, right? And they're talking about doubling or tripling in space, and you're looking around going, where are all the people? It's an odd thing as a real estate broker to visually see something like that and then be talking about this kind of, you know, rapid growth. So most of our clients now are in the process of mandating that their employees come back. Some of them are doing it through, okay, we want you to test once a week. And by testing once a week, at least we get you back in the office, or the hope is. But I think over the next 30 to 60 days, you'll see a lot of the bigger companies get people back to work. The smaller companies have never shut it off.
Thank you, Chad. It's fascinating. Derek, jumping over to you. Jeff just wrote in with a question I was going to ask, so we kind of beat into the punch here. But office has been talked about quite a bit about how people come back and use it, whether it be open floor plans, going back to maybe more of actual offices themselves with doors that close. And then, you know, how do people use space? So what are you hearing from tenants, landlords about how they're approaching this new hybrid model, whether that you believe they'll be around for a while, and how are they starting to adjust their space requirements?
Yeah, so I'd say generally speaking, COVID acted as an accelerator of existing conditions. And I say that both personally and professionally. I mean, if you had some stuff to work out personally before COVID, that became very real over the last year or so. You had to figure it out. You had to figure yourself out. You had to figure your family out, and you had to cope with it. But there are already trends. I think this addresses Jeff's question. It's a good question. But there are already trends that were surfacing in the office environment previously, pre-COVID, that were rapidly pushed forward during the pandemic in terms of utilization of office space, shared space, things being accomplished digitally where you don't have to be in the office every day. And that's really pushed that forward. I mean, in the near term, I think we're all the corporate clients that I'm negotiating with right now are contracting largely. And I think it's very industry specific too. Like, I mean, I think Chad's point, life science is in rapid expansion. Some tech industries are still in expansion mode, but the majority of the other tenants, corporate America, are looking at how they're going to utilize that space, how much square footage they actually need, who's going to be in the office, who's going to be on a hybrid schedule, who's working from home. And there's a lot of unanswered questions right now. But I think in the near term, we're likely to see a combination of both contraction of real estate footprint and less time spent in the office. In the long term, it's difficult to say whether these trends will stick, but I think it's misleading to believe that, we're in the red tier now. I think another critical aspect is our kids going back in school in summer. We're going to flip the light switch on and everything's going to be okay, and we're all going to go back. I don't see it. There's going to be a longer term impact to all this, and so I anticipate seeing some excess space come to the market in the form of sublease vacancy and direct vacancy when tenants come up for renewal and they start reassessing their footprint. Now, I also see there being a flight to quality, that tenants are seeking less space, but better quality space, highly amenitized space, projects that offer abundant outdoor spaces or access to retail or closer to the employment base. And again, those were already trends that were taking place before, that were accelerated over this last year.
I think it's product specific though. I mean,
Definitely.
Dad talked about life sciences, right? People are expanding, releasing space, and
Yeah.
the office side definitely challenged, but industrially, it's like life science. I mean, the market is as hot as it's ever been in my 35-year career. I mean, some tenants can't find buildings, right, Kelly? It's competitive out there.
It depends. It's within the vertical too. There's like the big boys there's no space, or there's multiple offers bidding up price. But there is a flight to quality for those guys too. ESFR is almost mandatory on anybody that's over
the norm, yeah.
Low office to warehouse, percentages, in those boxes. And I think that there seems to me at least an over grab of space for guy. So if he's out and he needs 60, he's going to grab 80 because he can't do another move, because the availability of land to build on and how that's going to morph into a higher rent in 24 months from now when they come out of the ground with increased construction costs and that sort of thing. They go from, an Inland Empire, I mean, they're doing 70-cent rents now.
Well, as they are down in Otay, right? I mean,
exactly. You could get 35 cents down in Otay, 3 years ago? 4?
Right. I mean, the Amazon factor is real, right? It's impacting every industrial user in the county. If Amazon has a need and you're competing with them, you better look somewhere else. I was looking at what's that?
The supply of industrial in that 20 to 30K there's a glut.
Yeah, but over 80, there's none.
Yeah, exactly.
Strange.
Very interesting.
Those users in that industrial sector, I think, are just like all of us, sort of hitting the pause button right now, trying to figure out where they fit in, hold over, or just kick the can and renew short term. Mm-hmm. They're just going to pause and see how we come out of this. And I'm hopeful that, we have a sunshine state. It's a beautiful place to live, and I think, chances are, if they're going to be anywhere in California, there's a good chance they might come down here.
I think we all agree on that. Brunson, jumping over to the capital markets, what Kelly, Chris, and Derek were just talking about, and kind of some of the shifts we're seeing and how people are looking at space. How are the capital markets approaching this? Obviously, there's a short-term view that I think a lot of people have had, tenants included and landlords included over the past year. But what's the long-term view? Is it we going back to normal, or the capital markets can make some real adjustments to how they approach looking at space and underwriting deals?
Yeah, I would say the broad answer to that is again, it's sector dependent. If it's, as Chris pointed out, if it's industrial, you know, the only adjustments we're seeing is compromising in underwriting to prevail in a bid process, right? So there's so much conviction. You know, that your high conviction themes are industrial, cold storage, life science, of course. You know, multis in a okay space relative to the rest of the universe. Offices, I think it's interesting, and retail is, I think, is very interesting. I mean, you could do a whole panel with Ron and all of his colleagues about what that looks like, but it doesn't look like it's certainly not going to go away. It's going to morph and change, and all the smart people in that space are going to innovate it into something other than what it was before. But in terms of how the capital markets see adapting office space vis-a-vis COVID, I think it has to do with the market. So when you talk about San Diego, capital loves San Diego. They loved it pre-COVID. They love it even more now. So right before we went into this, we were having calls with offshore capital, in-person meetings. The challenge with San Diego, the knock, is the structural limitation of the market itself, the lack of large scalable product. That's the trick. And so when you talk about office, is capital writing office off? Absolutely not. We have a national call a couple times a week, and I'll take 30 seconds of your time to just, this is going somewhere, I promise. We have an institutional investor twice a week that talks to our leadership and the leadership says, okay, here's the map of the country. You tell us what markets you want to talk about, and you tell us what sectors you want us to cover. And then away we go. So San Diego has been on that shopping list about 30% of the time over the last 12 months. Now, 30% in a lot of other facets of our life is nothing to write home about. But you know, when you think about the lens of truly institutional capital, how broad it is, how many sectors it encompasses, and for San Diego to be what they want to spend time on in the context of a 50-minute discussion, I would say it's a ringing bullish endorsement of the market on the whole, irrespective of sector. Has life science been a key driver in that interest? Absolutely. But it's much broader than that. All of the research is saying San Diego has all of these barriers to entry. It has these really definable drivers that, let's say, its sister market in Orange County doesn't have. And so when capital looks at a place that they want to go deploy to, whether it's in the retail sector, lab, industrial, et cetera, it's also looking for a downside hedge. And San Diego has a whole bunch of those. So capital is sort of frothy to find a way into San Diego. And then as it relates to office in particular, if that was your question, Ben, absolutely they're going to be disciplined. You're going to see capital allocate first to the most stable assets, and then it's going to move up the risk curve, in my opinion, as we move down the road, getting, you know, processing COVID and moving through that whole dynamic. But if you saw a bunch of sellers, the office challenge at the moment isn't on the buy side, it's on the sell side. And if how many of there are? 6, if the 6 of us had owned a project together that was office, we could, and it was in San Diego, we would probably get together for a coffee and say, do we sell now? No, we don't. There's really no catalyst for distress at the moment in office, right? There's liquidity in the debt sector for office. Tenants are all paying their rent for the most part. Collections are about 95-ish%, unless Derek and Chris tell me I'm wrong. That's what we're hearing. Tenants aren't necessarily showing up in earnest, but they're paying rent. So office is quite stable, particularly when you juxtapose it to some of the other big gateway cities like San Francisco, for example, where there's a lot of pain. Seattle's probably the hottest office market on the West Coast, and Boston's the hottest on the East. But none of our institutional clients are who were office players before are saying we're divesting of this asset class and we don't want anything to do with it. There are certainly questions, and will we get back to normal? We'll get back to people going back to the office, in my opinion. I think it's just going to look a little bit different than it did before, and I doubt anybody would, debate me on that.
Yeah.
That last part,
No,
debate me on a
agreed.
lot of other things, but not the going back to the office.
We're all agreed on that. Ron, I want to bounce a similar question over to you as it relates to retail. How are some of the landlords and owners that you're working with, how are they starting to position or reposition their assets to get ready for potential refinance or look at the sale of an asset? What are some of the things they're doing there to make those assets attractive to the capital markets on both the debt and equity side?
Well, I think, the A properties here, because the barriers to entry are so difficult on most areas. I mean, the A properties, there's a property in escrow right now that's basically a sub 5 for like a neighborhood shopping center. That's 100,000 feet. So when you're looking at what's going on here, a lot of the properties, it depends, people are looking long-term. So when a lot of like Mission Valley, a lot of things have been upzoned, right, with the trolley. So you're going to see a lot of the centers where you've got leases with 10 years left with the anchor tenants. Landlords are now starting to look, okay, what am I going to, am I going to tear this down and go vertical and do mixed use? But when you start having income on properties, it's tough to get that back to land value. So, even though you could go, if you have raw land today on some of the stuff, you would go vertical, but when you have a completely built out shopping center, it's 100% leased, getting good rents, it's hard to knock that down and get it back to land value just to be able to go vertical on it. So it really is going to depend on each property, but there's a lot of movements all over the place. The malls particularly, I think you're going to see some big movements on some of these. I mean, most of the mall locations are great real estate, but you've got big problems with the anchor tenants and controlling what you can do and cannot do on the property. I think North County Fair in Escondido is probably the perfect example of a mall. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that was the third highest grossing mall per square foot. You got Fashion Valley and UTC are the two big A malls here, but that was probably the number 3 mall. That property now, that could go so many different directions. It's on a ground lease, so it's got issues with term. There's a play going on the Sears box right now I can't talk about, but that's going to take it in a different direction if it goes that way. I mean, I think Amazon's want to put fulfillment centers in the Nordstroms. I don't think that'll happen either, but there's so many different directions some of these properties can go. Bill Gates has one great saying, you overestimate what happened in 1 year and underestimate what will happen in 10 years. And that really hits with me because when I look at what's going to happen over the next, few years here, some things will happen a lot quicker than we think they are, and some things will take a lot longer. And some of these properties, the retail, particularly the malls, they'll take some more time because of the restrictions, but it's a constant moving piece, and every little submarket of San Diego's got its own piece of that. There's areas like Carmel Valley, you could build 2 million square feet of retail and fill it up in a second. So really, it's really all over the board.
Thank you, Ron. Chad, I want to bring this next question over to you. Recent headlines have stated there's been about just slightly over $6 billion of VC funding that came into San Diego in 2020. A large portion of that went towards kind of life sciences, biotech sector. For a long time, I think we've all known that San Diego has been a really bright spot in the biotech life sciences world. We've got a great research institution, UCSD. But do you think this past year and the money that's now flowing into San Diego is pushing San Diego to become the premier biotech life science kind of region in the United States? And Boston's always been very strong, but is San Diego really making its mark on the map now?
Yeah. And frankly, I don't think it's just a life science thing. I mean, this is a different discussion, but it'd be hard to convince me that San Diego isn't going to be the winner on a lot of fronts, tech and biotech on the West Coast for the next 4 to 5 years, from what I'm seeing, right? Especially on the tech side and what we're seeing happen here, right? So you compound that with the life science and what's emerging there, I think San Diego is in a very good spot. But on the life science front, what's happening is it's growing up. It was always the stepchild and a young stepchild to Boston and to the Bay Area, right? And so what changed, it's kind of important to get a little context. Why is this market hot, right? And it was starting to catch steam. And this is not San Diego life sciences. Life sciences was starting to catch steam pre-COVID. And you can kind of see, you could see some capital start to move, and you'd start to see things online in news wires, on CNBC, what have you, where they were starting to predict the next 10-year run wasn't going to be tech, it was going to be biotech, or the integration of tech and medicine, right? And what happened in February of last year, right? The markets went cash, Wall Street went cash. And when that money got redeployed, it wasn't going into retail companies, right? Bricks and mortars. It went into, last mile, Amazon, those type of things, right? And it also went into life science in a huge way. So our companies that we represent here, and let me back up again. What is San Diego? San Diego is a build it and sell it town. This is an early incubator town. This is where most of the big pharmas have their national or global R&D centers. This is like where most of the ideas and IP are being made. It happens in Boston, it happens in the Bay Area, but those are more well-heeled companies, right? And so if you're investing capital, this is a great place to put it into earlier stage companies, assuming you can get a return as an investor. Well, where are the IPO markets if I go public? Well, they're on fire, right? Where's the M&A markets, with the big pharma buying the IP or these companies? Well, they're on fire. They're full of cash, right? And so our companies on the tenant side in San Diego, instead of getting 10 million, 20 million, they're getting 60 million, 100 million, 200 million. And they don't need 10,000 feet or 40,000 feet. They need 80,000 feet. And so all of a sudden our requirements, and this gets into the hiring again, our requirements got much larger. And so that is changing the makeup of San Diego to some degree. And more importantly, I think it's changing the mindset, right? Because some of the companies here are going, well, maybe I don't sell. Maybe I just go public and maybe I continue to grow it. And for the first time, they're going, well, maybe I stay here and I get a presence in Boston. Maybe I get a presence in Bay Area. For the first time, we're doing deals between the Bay Area and San Diego. I've never done in my career, are happening now, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a big mindset. The other big mindset shift on the tenants is there is no space. The tenants before, they're price sensitive. They had to conserve capital, take just enough space. We can see 2 years ahead. Well, I would bet any life science broker would tell you right now, the second you're signing your lease for 30,000 feet, you're already working, and it's a 10-year deal, you're already working on the next one. Or you're already working on the expansion, within the building, because there is such a land grab that is going on. There's no space. Alexandria's got like one space for 20,000 feet, their whole freaking portfolio. I mean, there is no space. And so we're heading into a huge shortage of supply, which is pushing up rents. Everyone's land grabbing the remaining space. It's forcing tenants to think ahead, the way that they have in Boston, the way that they have in San Francisco, which I think is going to be good for San Diego. And so now they're having to think ahead of when's the next supply, 3 years out, right? Which is where we're at, right? That's where all the build-to-suits are at. So all of these companies are now having a mind shift of going, we got to think 3 years out. If you look at the build-to-suit sites and the land sites in the hub of Torrey Pines, UTC, and Sorrento, they're under negotiation. I mean, they have RFPs and they have proposals. So I like that tenants are having to think like the big boys in the other markets. I think that's going to serve us well long term. On the ownership side, we were always at a huge price discount, right? But because we have a lack of supply and a ton of liquidity, right? Everybody's got $100 million life science fund, it seems like these days, that, you're getting cap rates that are, and this is Brunson and I have sold a bunch of buildings together. I'm kind of talking into his arena, but, you're going to see some cap rates up in the Torrey Pines and stuff area, UTCs that are going to be fives, maybe sub fives, because how are you a player in life science if you don't have a presence in Torrey Pines, like a real player, right? And that's a mindset if you're building a portfolio, and the pricing and land values are just getting out of control, right? And so, I mean, if you start taking a 565 rent, applying a cap rate on that, of a 5, and then you start backing out development guys, we're going to see land comps in some of those markets in excess of $500 per FAR foot. which we were pre-COVID, we were $130 per FAR foot, something like that. So, and they're going to be even north of that. And so, you know, people and investors are willing to pay up to those kind of price ranges that we're seeing in other markets. So it's a mind shift on the ownership side, and it's a mind shift on the tenant side, that we are a legitimate, you know, number 3, but it's those 3 markets, and everything else is distant.
That's great.
And I just quickly want to quantify one thing that Chad said, because it underscores this point. So we're tracking like about 5.5 million square feet of active tenant requirements countywide. That's office, life science. 4 million square feet of that, which is whatever, 72 or 73%, is just tech and life science. And Chad, correct me if I'm wrong, of that 4 million demand of tech and life science, we're over 2.5 million square feet. That's just life science. So that's 63% of that 4 million is just in life science. And there is no product in the near term to accommodate them, which leads into your point, which is supply constrained in the near term and causing a frenzy of conversions and development that's going to be coming 2023 and beyond. It's exactly incredible right. What's happening.
Yeah.
And those conversions are impacting both the office market availability, 100%. The industrial market availability, and the land market availability, right? I mean, absolutely. Everything's being impacted by life science explosion right now.
You know, there's a kind of a freight train effect you're just talking about. It's having come from the Bay Area originally, and kind of witnessing, like, you know, why wasn't, you know, downtown San Diego like action-packed like Silicon Valley or like San Francisco? And I noticed this big move. I've been here, I'm like, kids, we got kids that are grown and out of college, and they all moved to San Francisco, but the price of, you know, and all educated. And so it seems like to me that you have a bunch of capital finally coming here to, it was always said that there was starving, you know, there was starved of venture capital, you know, investing in these small companies 20 years ago. So that's got the steam going. You have the skilled labor coming out of good universities here. You have, comparatively speaking, lower cost of housing. I mean, it's absorbent here, but, you know, as compared to San Francisco and some other parts of the Bay Area or the peninsula, it just seems like it's a perfect storm to put the catcher's mitt on and have San Diego life science just really become much more dominant than I think a lot of us ever thought. I mean, would you agree or disagree? Anybody?
I would agree. And I would say, you know, when some of the things that maybe made San Diego in the eyes of investors a little bit of a sleepy corner of the world are now strengths, oddly enough, you know, in this new environment with COVID. So when you think about an investor looking into San Diego and then looking at the Bay Area and Boston, let's say, let's keep the conversation on the life science front for just a second. San Diego is sort of built for this, right? It's suburban. If you threw a blanket over San Diego, most of the product that you would have underneath that blanket is low rise. It's not mass transit dependent. So a lot of the things that sort of bubbled up that are weaknesses for, let's say, a San Francisco, for example, or a Boston, which are the inverse of everything I just described, the suburban sprawling nature of San Diego is a value driver now. And so, you know, I think Chad and Derek and Kelly and Chris's point about what is the broader effect of life science on this market? It is, you know, if you look at Sorrento Mesa as a little bit of a microcosm of life sciences effect on that submarket, in 2015, you know, Sorrento was a bit of a smoking hole in the ground, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with it in light of the Qualcomm contractions, and it was sort of being written off. And then we look at it today, even pre-COVID, Sorrento was the most active submarket in San Diego from a sales and leasing perspective. And it's really been a beacon of transaction activity over the last year or so, in great part due to life science. But to Chad's point, you can't forget about tech. It's really the confluence of both, I think, that makes San Diego unique. And then when you layer that on top of what is the structural atmosphere here, it's a suburban, low density environment with a really highly educated, entrepreneurial, innovative business community. To Chad's point, this is where all the great ideas happen. And then when they get big enough and expensive enough, they get exported, and then they start over again. So it's not all green shoots, in my opinion. In San Diego, we've got some wood to chop here, But we've got there's a lot to seize on that's positive here. And these markets are small. It doesn't take much to go from a 15% vacancy rate in a given cluster in San Diego to all of us saying it's super tight and there's no space. We've all been guilty of in 1 year saying, my God, is it ever going to come back? 18 months later, there's no space to be found. So life science, I think, is going to be a boon for the entire market. It's going to attract smart people to a place that's already attractive to live in. But I don't think you can forget about technology either.
Let's throw this next question out that came in from Kevin Heinley about ESG investing. It's always been a trend. We've seen a lot in the capital markets, kind of more of your securities with companies taking an ESG approach. They're hiring ESG kind of C-suite people to help manage some of this. Kind of a question to this panel. Do you think ESG investing will have an impact on real estate in general and then real estate development here in San Diego?
What's ESG?
Is that you just talking about the sustainability?
Environmental.
Yeah, sustainability.
So a lot of the
Architect
stuff with
acronym.
Heinley.
yeah.
It sounds like Heinle's pitching a new Gensler program.
Heinley, what's Gensler working on these days?
Yeah.
But there's obviously, I think it's an interesting question as companies start to build ESG policies, whether it be around buildings that are net zero with solar, if there's other aspects to how they approach just requirements for space, outdoor space, things like that. So curious if it's come across any of your desks or inboxes from your larger, more institutional clients that they have an ESG policy or requirement that they're trying to meet. Chris, Kelly, curious if you're seeing either along those lines.
I have one multi-market warehouse distribution tenant that has, I would say, showcase that they're have thought about it and are trying to brush through it. And I don't want to say that lightly because I know that they're serious about it, but to answer the question from another perspective, which is vendors that service these customers, be it architects, contractors, et cetera, that have taken all these LEED certification credentials and what have you, they have said that it's a great thing to know and to have, but rarely do they get tapped to implement those policies. I think with the whole awareness of the next generation that's coming, and God bless you guys, there will be probably more of that adopted in the future. But for right now, I think people are trying to get just butts back in seats and back to normal and not spending that kind of money right now.
Yeah.
Hey,
Chad,
Chris,
question.
you want me to read to you, Chris, what ESG investing means? I got it looked up on the internet.
Yeah, you Googled it? Good job, buddy.
I just Googled it. I think Heinley's trying to drum up business.
Yeah. Well, that's great. We're coming up on kind of the end of our hour here. So I wanted to kind of ask each of you and kind of for some short words of wisdom. Year's always been tough in many regards. It's been good in many regards too for a lot of people, but I think for a lot of young professionals out here, this is kind of our first real recession or crisis that we've had to deal with. A lot of us came into business after the great financial crisis and have only really seen real estate go up. And we've been really lucky to be a part of an area in the country such as San Diego where real estate's been really strong. But this is kind of our first go around. We're taking some bumps and bruises. So shortly as we wrap up, I would appreciate some kind of personal advice to all the young professionals listening in about how you've dealt with this past year. And Kelly, why don't we start with you?
Well, to quote Silver Lining Playbook, you must have a plan. It's funny. Even older guys, back in the day, wouldn't have a plan, and you just have to have a plan. And I'm talking, take the time, do the 1 year, the 2 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, the 10 year. I mean, put it on roller coaster or put it on wheels and let it slide around, but make a plan. Hang out with winners, watch them, emulate them, ask them to, Ask them to politely mentor you, but do it at 7 a.m. in the morning. Don't take up their prime time. Don't, set an appointment with them. Get mentorship upstream and downstream, depending on where you're at in your career, and continue in education. I mean, the bottom line is that if you're determined and motivated and you hang with winners and you make a plan, you will succeed.
It's great advice. Chris?
My business philosophy is very simple. And it's the same when things are good and things are bad. One is don't work with jerks. Because people that don't respect you today won't respect you tomorrow. And the other thing is, follow the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. And if you do those two things, you'll probably be happy. You will have a good group of people to work with, both constituents, clients, coworkers, and you'll be successful.
Great, thank you. Ron, same question for you.
Yeah, I think I've always looked at this business as passion. I think everybody on this panel, has a passion for this business. So I've been doing this 36 plus years. I still get up every day, look forward to what I'm going to do. I never recommend anything to any client that I wouldn't do myself. So I always put, I'll push hard for one way. At the end of the day, it's their decision, their money, but they're paying me to give them their advice. And so I'm very vocal with that. I also, I have a client list that I keep with me. I look at it every Sunday night, not every Sunday, typically say, who haven't I talked to personally? And so I reach out to people personally, not just emails, see how they're doing, even if I haven't been working with them for a while. And you always want to make sure you're staying, especially when things are slow on a project, you want to make sure your clients aren't calling you, you're calling them first. And the other thing is
Great advice.
I stay good friends with most of the good brokers. I mean, they're good people, just, spite Chris, and, they're fun to be around. And I don't go after other people's listings. There's plenty of business, and the good brokers are your best allies. They're your comps. Like I said, CoStar comps aren't very good. So you want the broker comps. So passion.
Great.
Passion.
Thanks, Ron. Brunson, over to you.
Yeah. So first off, you should take care of your hair. It's more important than you think. people are paying attention. I'm joking. Here's
Chris
what I would
has
say.
nailed that over the past year then.
Yeah, he's on fire. Well, that's why he's had so much success. It's right there,
Yeah.
proof's in the pudding. I would say this. So you started this question off saying it's been a difficult time. There's probably nobody that would say it hasn't been in some form or fashion, whether it's business or personal or whatever over the last year or so. But when I started in the business, I had this, I was a leasing broker, oftentimes wake up in the middle of the night, still wish that I was, but the first 2 deals I did, they just kind of happened. I went and I toured, I got an LOI, I signed it, and it all worked out. And I thought, well, this is how it works. You get, it's a deal comes through the door, and if you mind it properly, it happens. And of course, that's not true. So, whether the challenge is macro or deal related, these tough times, the challenges that we're all facing, I'm going to keep this narrowly focused on commercial real estate and deal stuff. Without those, none of us on this call would have a job. We're not here, to just post the listing and then see it through to the end. We're here to solve problems. I mean, guys are hiring Derek and Chad and Kelly and Chris for a whole bunch of other reasons, but because they know how to solve problems, they know how to get deals done. Deals are going to oftentimes die 1,000 deaths. That's what Derek Holtz is there to do, is to resuscitate it and bring it back to life. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes into it, creatively marketing assets and dealing with the broker on the other side. But I think my humble opinion is, when you boil it down to the essence of your job, the essence of your job is to handle problems when they come up. You use your expertise to solve problems, for your clients. The basics of the deals would otherwise handle themselves. So when things are tricky and tough, you should let a little smile creep across your face, because that's the justification for you sitting in the seat you're sitting in. So, you know, I was in the Marine Corps in a former life, and we used to have a saying. It was "embrace the suck," which hopefully that doesn't offend anybody. Embrace the tough times. Brokerage is full of those, whether it's a macro COVID event or a dot-com bust or a housing meltdown. So when those things happen, it's a gut punch. You know, take a deep breath and wrap your arms around them, because that's why someone's gonna hire you to go handle those for them. They're gonna hire your expertise, your personal skills to solve problems. So when tough times come, just know that what you're greeting is the reason for your job. It's the reason for your lifestyle, the compensation, everything else. That's my 2 cents. And have fun. Real estate's supposed to be fun. We're not splitting the atom. We're not sequencing. Well, Chad maybe as a life science guy, he's probably doing some science on the side, but it's deal stuff with generally smart, fun people. So try to enjoy it. Last thing, I got into the business in 07, 08. Right at the beginning of the guy that hired me, I'll never forget. He said, "Yeah." I go, "What do you think? Is there going to be a correction?" I didn't even really know what a correction was. He said, "There's going to be a softening. You know, there'll definitely be a softening." It was a little bit more than a softening, but those hard times, that's when your skill set is built. Easy deals don't teach you much. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
That's great advice. Thank you, Brunson. Chad, over to you. You're on mute right now, Chad. Thanks.
About that. What an opportunity to be a young person, right? And I say that because here's what I see. I see a lot of seasoned, accomplished real estate brokers losing track of who they are, right? And part of it is you got to make a living. I got lucky. I happen to be in life science, but you see a lot of people moving outside of what their specialty is, right? And so, you know, I've always been a believer, right? As a young person, hard work and execution is the norm, right? You got to outwork the competition. That's a given. But, you know, you got to have kind of 2 thought process. One, you're not either as successful as you want to be because you're either not in front of the right people, which means the book of business you have needs to change, right? You need to get in front of the right people. Or number 2, your brand doesn't sell or somebody else's brand stronger. And so when you're a master of many things, you don't have a brand. Ideally, you will develop a brand when someone says Brunson Howard, the first thing they go is capital markets, he sells buildings. And if you don't have that immediate branding, somebody else does, and you'll never get there. And you can have a great career just working within those confines. Now, as you get to the really elite, you know, there's other things that come into play, right? As far as execution, skill level, knowledge, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, when you're early on, you got to focus on staying in your lane, building your brand, growing that up, letting clients understand what you're about, getting them promoting for you, right? And that would be my advice.
That's great, Chad. I think we could probably spend a whole nother lunch and learn on building your personal brand. So great idea for the future. Derek, winding it up with you.
Do what I do. You wake up every morning, you say, "Dear Lord, please help me get through this day." No, I think, first of all, everything everybody has said is really good, sage wisdom. And I'll piggyback on Chad's a little bit. Is in any service, and not just for brokerage, anybody out there, most of us are in the service and sales industry. You only have your time and your information, and you trade that for dollars, essentially. So you have to figure out how to effectively allocate your time, and you need to have a high degree of specialization information. It's exactly what Chad said. If your name is not mentioned in the top 3 when someone says institutional office or capital markets or life science or industrial or tenant rep, then you're not there yet. It doesn't mean you won't get there. We've all been there, right? It just means you haven't crafted that brand yet, and you don't have a high enough degree of information that is really valuable for your target audience, because your clients rely on you to provide critical pieces of information to make informed decisions about their real estate. And the more you know, the more valuable you become to them. So that is critical. And then the other thing, of course, is just life lessons, is, you know, approaching the business with humility, having a passion, and being respectful. You know, to this day, I still really try to take the time to call people back, to spend time with them. You know, like for what I do, spending time with young analysts, you know, those young analysts end up becoming the head asset managers at this point. And if you blow them off at an early stage, you know, it doesn't win you many points. So it's do it in a genuine way, and treat people with respect.
That's great. Thank you, Derek. I think probably last but not least, hopefully we'd all agree that you know, being a part of NAIOP is a huge part of, you know, growing up in this profession. I think we've hopefully you'd all say that you found a lot of value in being a NAIOP member, and we appreciate all the time that you've given us here today. And thank you so much for providing some personal advice as well, and kind of a look behind the scenes into what each of you are doing. So with that, we'll wrap this up. Again, thank you all. We really appreciate it. Thanks to our sponsors. And we look forward to seeing most of you in person, hopefully this summer, at a great cocktail party that NAIOP will throw.
Thanks, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And